Welcome to some BeamNG and automation today. Today we are going to go over some suspension, but before we get to suspension, we have to have a car. And I thought, you know, every time that Americans have really implemented a turbo engine car, it's either been a 4-cylinder or a V6, but they've never done a turbo V8. So I thought I would do that today. But since we're going with like an 70s, cross 80s kind of car, you know, cross-platform chassis, something like the K car, which I was recently informed about because I didn't know it existed because Chrysler is really only an American company. We're gonna go with steel, and it's going to be a ladder with more steel. Now, they had, I believe, these, I'm not sure. We're just gonna go with the front longitudinal, because this is gonna be a proper muscle car. Double wishbone and double wishbone. And go with something like a 5.5 liter. Oh, Exactamundo on, nice. Yeah, now we're not going front wheel drive, guys. Cast iron, because we want this to be cheap. Compression will probably go down to something like an 8. Cam profile could stay fairly low and very lumpy. Turbos, it'll probably be a journal ball bearing, and I don't know how much power we're gonna have. Probably go with fuel economy because still that's a lot of power to be gotten out of extra out of a 70s and 80s fuel restricted, emissions restricted V8. Do we go with injection? Yeah, we probably do. We'll probably go with single point EFI because this is really early on in the fuel injection era for America. Standard intake, is that what we want? Let's just go with a regular leaded because this is a leaded fuel. And then a couple of baffled mufflers. Oh, that's a lot of knocking. 182 kilowatts? That's 244 horsepower. So we really want to blow 276 horsepower out of the water. Well, we have a lot more torque than they do. Goodness gracious. Well, there we go. I think we have created our American muscle V8 turbo. Well, twin turbo. And 256 kilowatts, which is 343 horsepower, which is very impressive. Now, do we give it any sort of paint job? Probably not. They probably would have kept it very basic. Maybe just a bit of a block job. We'll give it a nice lime color. Nice. And a listen. Very quiet, not a whole lot of blow-off valve, unfortunately. We go with rear-wheel drive. Obviously, it's an American car, so it'll be an automatic. Not sure if it should be a 3-speed or a 4-speed, but we'll say that this is their, like, top-of-the-line muscle car, and people are going to be willing to pay just a little bit more for it. No special differential, obviously. Oh, or maybe we'll put a viscous in. Do they look like alloys or magnesiums? They might still be steel. Who knows? Whatever. Solid disc on the front, one piston, and then a drum on the rear. Because they need to reuse parts from some other car, right? No under frame, sporty interior. Oh, you know, maybe it won't be sporty. Maybe it'll be like some sort of premium. And a standard 8-track, hydraulic power steering, no ABS, basic 70s safety, standard spring. This one is a lot cheaper, like a heck of a lot cheaper. So we're gonna go with gas twin tube, and then we'll select this to like a normal condition. All right, so here's where we start getting into the handling characteristics of a car. And actually, these are the 3 graphs you'll need. Now, this one, the steering, slow in brackets, you'll find under here, under for your tire area, because the tires dramatically affect this. So generally, bigger front tires creates more oversteer, smaller tires create more understeer. Now, to understand this graph, and this is the most important graph, you want to have these 2 dots basically inside of this area for a race kind of car. So there we go, we got it in there. And you'll notice that we're just touching into the oversteer kind of section at a between basically 0 all the way up until about 65 kilometers an hour. Now, yours will probably be in miles per hour, but the more numbers you see coming in here, because this graph changes, the better it is. So now that we've made the front tires really small, you'll see that the number here is 50 kilometers an hour before it starts to become really bad, and then it just dies off. So you want not only these 2 numbers to stay in here for as high as possible between these 2, but you also want this number down the bottom here to be the biggest, because this is how the car is responding at a certain speed. So at 40 kilometers an hour, you're getting a fair amount of understeer. And if you go the other way, and then make the rear tire smaller, you can see here that your car is still controllable. It hasn't completely lost itself, but it is quite slidey, and it's going to be problematic to put power down. You're not going to have a particularly great car, and then you're going to end up with a very sharp amount of understeer very suddenly. If we keep going, you see that at about so this is 60, that'll be 70. At about 74, 73-ish kilometers an hour, the car starts to chronically oversteer, and at that point, the car is just completely uncontrollable. So generally what I like to do for a controllable car is to bring the front tires down and until we're about here. So we have our drivability. So this is your normal sort of driving speed around a corner, and this is your sporty speed around a corner. This is the way I like to think of it. So at normal driving, you're on the edge of starting to get a little bit of wheel squeal. If you push it a little bit harder, you might get a little bit of oversteer with maybe a clutch dump or something like that. But when you're going at your sporty speeds, you're going to be understeering just a little bit. So it's up to you where you want that to sit. Now, these other two graphs, this is how stiff your suspension is. So here is your suspension stiffness kind of configuration. In the middle, you have your drivability scale marker, then you have your comfort scale marker, and your sportiness scale marker. So basically, the higher up you go, the more race-like your car is. So what's happened here is this is your drivability kind of marker. This is where you want your car to be for regular drivability. But here we've sacrificed a little bit of that. We're going towards the comfort marker, but not all the way to comfort. If we were to select a preset for a race, you can see that you've given up a lot of drivability to go for a lot more sportiness, and you can keep making it sportier. Now I'm just going to show you if I bring the front suspension all the way up, you'll see now that these graphs don't match, and that causes an uneven bouncing, which is very undesirable for most vehicles. The only one that you'd want to have it for is a load carrying vehicle like a big van or a ute or one of those American truck things. One way to easily kind of get them matching up is to have these be even here. Now that I've got these kind of evened up, you can see that this graph here is a lot more even. You're not going to have uneven bouncing where like the front bounces or the rear bounces too much. Now, the added advantage here is making this stiffer means that this has gone up a little bit in the numbers here. Only just a little bit. We weren't creating a race car before. Now let's go into a little bit of theory of suspension tuning. Okay, so let's say that you're turning left. When you turn left, all your weight goes to this tire, and this tire starts to lift up and put less pressure on the ground. And if you have really stiff suspension, it's going to magnify that by lifting more off of the ground. So you're going to end up with overall less grip on the front because you're going to have most of your grip here and considerably less grip here. But what that does is that helps keep this part of the vehicle flat, meaning if you have softer rear suspension, you're going to have a lot more grip on the rear. So if you're creating a drag car, you'll have very stiff suspension on the front and relatively soft in the rear. So this will be kind of your guiding, keep the car level, and this will be the I'm touching the ground at all times. If you, however, want a drift car, you're going to make your rear suspension really stiff, which means it'll reduce traction, and your front will have a lot more grip. And then when you have, say, like a locker on the outside tire, it'll keep the power even, and that'll help it be a lot more controlled when kicking out. And there's how to understand these three basic graphs. Now, let me go into why you don't look at the aerodynamics graph. You can look at the aerodynamics graph to start off with to see how much lift the car is creating. Here it's actually creating a ginormous amount of lift. You can see here that it's at its top speed kind of area. It's getting about 70 kilos on the front and about 70 something kilos on the rear. That's a lot of lift. That's going to reduce a lot of traction at high speed. Beyond that, automation and BeamNG calculate how much downforce your wings will create differently. If you look here, this is all basically about traction. If you see a flat line, that means basically those wheels are not accelerating you, they're just getting lots of wheel spin. But you can kind of guess that this first area is your first gear, your second gear seems fine, your third gear seems fine, and there's your fourth gear. It all seems fine. It's just really in the middle of your first gear where you're going to have a huge amount of wheel spin. Now, having a lighter car will also help your car with handling. And we're going to also upgrade this to sports compound, and you're going to see that this number goes up a bit by moving the graph down. Currently, the graph ends at about approximately 75 kilometers an hour. Now, we've only changed that a little bit, and it looks like we're maxing out at maybe 80 kilometers an hour, maybe just a little bit less. We select semi-slicks. Oh, okay, now we're probably at about 80. Unfortunately, if you have your thing here, it doesn't tell you what numbers we're looking at. It's unfortunate, but we're going to go with a sports compound for now, and we're going to make these out of magnesium and put on something like these. I love these wheels so much. Anyway, going back to actually how we feel about this car, we've actually created a pretty good one. A 0 to 100 for this day and age of a really heavy vehicle. This weighs 1.4 tons basically. We're looking at 5.7 seconds to 100 for what was meant to be a comfortable car. I suppose I should also go into your pads here. The dotted line is how much traction you have, and the solid line is how much force you're able to apply. So really what you want is for these to be close to these. So let's bring up our braking force up to our traction limit. Now we can see that our front wheels are going to lock up because our braking force is above our braking grip. So what do? We go to comfort. Now that we've done that, we have a decent amount of traction. You may actually want to say that if you're going going 240, a lockup is probably the least of your worries. But you'll see that you're going to lock up on the front, but not on the rear, and that can be problematic. You do want very even braking. But how do we do that? Changing this changes both at the same time. Well, you got your brake bias. Now we can see that they both start losing traction at the same amount of time. We wanted to say that you can lock up over 240 kilometers an hour. Let's change that brake pad up, because at low speeds, you're going to be suffering for brakes. And there we go. Now, what you would really optimally like for real world applications is to have these graph lines be fairly flat for fuel economy. What you can do is put on some sort of spoiler on the back. Let's go with this. No, let's not go with that. We have a bit of a spoiler on the rear. Now this graph means nothing, but we are going to update it so then you can kind of get an idea. Now you'll see that you're not getting any lift and only a little bit of downforce, but this has affected you now. So that's generally what you'll want to see for fuel economy. If, however, you have a lot of rear downforce, once again, ignore this graph, you'll see that you'll need a lot of brake force to be able to brake at high speed. Now we're only looking at the rear brakes because we've only done the rear aerodynamics. So you'll see here that you're going to lock up at low speeds, but then at high speeds, you're not going to lock up anymore. Just something to think about. For now, we're going to leave this at 50-50. Maybe put on a little bit of wing at the front. But keep in mind that when these cars go to BeamNG, the thing that calculates how big your wing is and how effective your wing is only comes down to the size and angle. Nothing about how many wings and all that sort of stuff. Also, lip and spoiler do nothing. Only wing. So that's where mods come into play for putting on a front downforce. So now we have a front and a rear wing. Update it by just tapping this, and you can get an idea that now the brakes are way overpowered on the front. Let's stick with something like that. If you want to have that graph where the grip goes up, and then you want to have your maximum braking also at its maximum speed, you're going to get a lock up a lot on the front. That's where ABS comes into play. But we're going to say that this car is kind of pre-ABS for American cars. Let's just go ahead and finish this car up. And there we have it, our completed car. That kind of looks a little bit odd, but I'm not entirely sure what to do there. We should probably make a badge for this. This is the Mueller brand. I can't remember what it was that the Mueller used, so we're just gonna put a big M on it for now. We'll say that this is more the upmarket Mueller. This is their pinnacle showing what they can do type thing, so it's got a special badge. What does this do around the test track? What do we reckon? 2 minutes, 22 seconds. You know what? For an 80s car, that's not particularly bad, especially since it weighs quite a lot for back in the 80s. And there's our lovely gray color. This is meant to be like a silver type of color, but it's just come out flat gray because they don't know how to do metallic, unfortunately, between the two games. Or maybe it's just that BeamNG doesn't have metallic. So in here we got a lovely interior, lots of great leather that doesn't look shitty and ugly at all. Got our digital dash there, which came out exactly how I imagined it in every single way. That's come out great as well. At least that's got color, and it's currently in neutral, so that's ooh, I don't know how to deal with that. As for the rest of the car, I'm not sold on the grille and the color of their headlight glass. I do like the wheels. The wheels always look great with those wheels. Unfortunately, didn't realize that was happening until I'd exported it already, so that's unfortunate. Still don't know what I should have done with the... Oh, okay. Well, I'm walking around now because I pressed F as opposed to the button I was meant to press. I think actually F is what I had bound for moving the camera upwards, so now I'm gonna have to change that. So yeah, this is our car, and I hope you like it. You're about to see now, with using a controller, not with a steering wheel, that this thing has no major oversteer and no major understeer. We're going to get this thing to about the 80km/h mark. So at about 80 is when this thing started to lose a bit of traction. Now we're dealing with a little bit of downforce, so it's really helping us. But you can see that I didn't set the car to oversteer at all, so instead it just understeers quite a bit. But with that extra downforce, which automation doesn't know how to really get over to BeamNG, you can see there that, yeah, it has that major problem there. But aside from that, this thing handles pretty nicely, actually. I should probably take it out of manual control for the gearbox so it could actually be in a gear that it wants to be in. It's very quiet. You got a little bit of turbo chirp, which sounds pretty awesome. And it feels as if it has built-in traction control. But no, that's just lag. Oh my god, you can see when this thing really hits on power. I think maybe the power graph was a little deceiving. Oh, you know what it might have been? Actually, sorry, you know what? That might have been the... Yeah, that's the gearbox changing gear, not the turbo kicking in. That sort of acceleration would be just insane. You can see that it's really low and then boom! Yeah, nah, that's not what I thought it would be. So yeah, I created a fairly well-balanced, very stiff suspension car. Oh, okay, gotta get that a little bit sideways there because it did lose a little bit of traction. Actually, you know what? I was thinking that this is going to be pretty garbage, but since I did the suspension upgrade, this thing is pretty good. I really do like it. I think this is probably one of the better cars I've created, trying to be period correct and all that. But let's stick this thing into a gear. Apparently I have drive, second, and first. So I don't have third or overdrive as an option. That sucks. But let's stall this converter up. Let's not get wheel spin, let's just stall a little bit. And we're gonna see when the turbo kicks in. It really starts to feel it over 3,000 RPM. And I also think that it changed gears into third. I don't know what's up with this gearbox, if I'm being honest. It's a very weird setup, but yeah. I really do like the interior, even though I stuffed it up just a little bit in the whole colors issue. Let's go take this to do a test track whilst we give it a Phil score. Haha, I didn't say Doug score for once. I mean, oh damn it, no, not copyright, please no copyright strike. And here's our competitor for our drag race to start with. This is the 3800 something or other. It's their sporty facelift version. So we're gonna see how the two compare. Don't actually know what engine is in this thing. I see a V8 and I see a supercharger. So I do have my work cut out for me. This is not going to be easy. All right, let's bring it up to the start line. Oh, there we go, and go. Oh, I couldn't do the brake start, unfortunately, but I am beating him. I reckon I would have been able to get a better launch if I had been able to do a proper brake stand, but we beat the pants off of it. So let's move on. Now, with only one small, minor mistake, I was able to get a good lap time done. So let's start with weekend categories. And for styling, this is a very old design, but it's finally starting to reach that turning point where people are starting to appreciate it in a retro way. So it gets a 6 out of 10. For the acceleration, that lag is pretty bad. Exacerbated by the dead feeling of that automatic transmission, it all takes away from its awesome 13-second quarter mile and a 4.7 second to 100 kilometers an hour. It earns its 7 out of 10. Handling is a mixed bag though. The cornering is nice, the balance is well done, but slushy with that engine and transmission combo, giving the cornering an unsatisfying feeling. But all in all, it gets a 6 out of 10. The fun factor is high. If you pull up to an R35 Skyline and almost keep up with it to 100 kilometers an hour in a car from the early 80s, it gets an 8 out of 10. The cool factor though is kind of lower, as for most people, this car is forgotten, so you'll have to open up that exhaust to get people to look your way. So it only gets a 6 out of 10. The trackability though is surprisingly not bad, though you'd probably want to swap out that slush box. It gets a 7 out of 10 as it stands. This all up gives the Mueller Grand Tourer a total of 40 out of 60, and for a car in that in-between era, that's pretty good. Moving on to the daily scores though, it gets a little more hurt. The features suck. It has an 8-track. Sure, it can be upgraded, but we're going with what you get. The climate controls are also very dated and not particularly great, so it gets a 3 out of 10. The comfort? Cushy seats, sure. But that stiff suspension is going to make you pull your hair out as a daily driver, giving it a 2 out of 10. As for quality, it's American, so the leather doesn't last and the plastics break down. And with that early era turbo engines, yikes, that's a 3 from me, Bob. The practicality isn't so bad though, plenty of room and the boot isn't too small. But it's only a 2-seater, making getting in and out of the back a whole thing, giving it only a 7 out of 10, which is still pretty good. The value is tricky to predict, however, as the prices of these are really starting to boom quite a lot. Currently, at this exact moment, I'd give them a 9 out of 10. But then it all tumbles down as you're going to need to do a lot for this aged engine, as it wants to break down. In its heart of hearts, it wants to die. And that fuel mileage? Oof, it gets a 1 out of 10. This adds up to a total daily score of 25 out of a possible 60, and that's not great. Though putting everything together, it gets a total fill score of 65, putting it on par with the Heisenberg Cholo and above the mobile home Cargo. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I really did enjoy this video, and I hope you learned at least a little bit of something about the suspension and the graphs. And if you do like this sort of stuff, please subscribe to me. We are so close to 1,000 and I can get monetized. But for now, I'll catch you next time. Goodbye.